Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on digital platform selection. Our speakers for this topic are Rahul Khosla, partner at eDynamic, and Rolf Krause, CMS Practice Director, also at eDynamic. We are here to discuss the challenges and best practices of selecting a digital platform. As part of our agenda, we'll cover a quick introduction to eDynamic, an overview of digital platform selection, challenges and best practices with selecting a digital platform, and finally, we'll take up a case study of large international electronic consumer manufacturer to cover the selection process best practices. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. And now, over to Rahul Khosla from eDynamic.
Well, thank you very much, Kamya. We're certainly very excited to be here to talk to you about a topic that is not only critical to the success of any digital strategy for marketers and technologists alike, but an area that we find is full of frustration and could causes problems in organizations. So we're here to talk about our experiences, our perspectives, and hopefully you can take away certain ideas from this conversation. We certainly are available for follow-up discussions if needed. As Kamya described, the agenda for the conversation, we'll do a quick introduction to eDynamic, but then we'll really get into the crux of the material to talk about what ultimately would lead to successful digital platform selection. What are the challenges that you might face? And then a real case study of picking a platform for a fairly large electronics retailer. Just a quick introduction to eDynamic. We're a digital solutions firm, global. We have offices in North America, Asia, in the Middle East, and we have expertise in various verticals, including financial services, technology, retail, travel, and many more. At eDynamic, what we really do is we blend strategy, experience, and technology to help marketers with acquisition and servicing of customers. So in this example, in the conversation we're having today, we are going to talk about those areas and how we help marketers select platforms, but we're also going to talk about the challenges they face. This is just an overview of some of our customers. I won't spend a lot of time here. But really what we're here to talk about is digital platform selection. It's an area that it's changing. There's rapid transformation taking place currently. We're finding that our customers are finding it difficult to select appropriate platforms with all the change that's taking place. And in this conversation, we would love to talk about what does it take to select a digital platform? What are some of the frustrations and challenges? What are some of the pitfalls that you should look for? And hopefully some of that will resonate with you. There's been a transformation that's been taking place in the digital space. We're finding that marketers' needs are becoming very sophisticated. Social media has changed the way that brands engage with customers. And there's been a proliferation of technology, of products in the digital space, which is leading to challenges. And selecting a platform is not as simple as it appeared to be. There was a time when it was simple. There was a time when selecting a CMS was essentially selecting a digital platform. That's no longer the case. We're finding that under the hood, there's a lot more. When it comes to selecting a digital platform, we find that quite a few decision makers go down the path of selecting a CMS, but very quickly they realize it's more than just selecting a CMS. There's marketing automation technologies, there's communities, there's digital asset management, and so many more. And this ecosystem is growing. But that's what it's all about. It's all about selecting within that ecosystem. It's about understanding what your needs are and then picking the appropriate technologies that would meet your needs. So there's certainly more than meets the eye. It's not just about selecting a CMS. And that's where we find right off the bat quite a few decision makers and organizations struggle because they're trying to find this right fit CMS. And to be honest, there is none. CMSs do certain things, but there are areas where they simply have no capabilities or very, very limited capabilities. So certainly when it comes to selecting a digital platform, it comes down to a basket of platform options. It comes down to options where you're selecting a few capabilities which are cohesive. It might be a CMS, it might be e-commerce, it might be search, and you're bringing them together to ultimately fulfill your solution that meets your needs. At this time, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Rolf Krause, who is going to speak about the digital platform. But before we do that, we are going to quickly do a poll where we would love to get your perspective on the selection process. So the organizer, if you don't mind, if you could launch the poll, and we'll wait for a minute, and you would see the poll appear, and we would love to see your perspective on the challenges that you face when you're selecting a digital platform. So we'll wait for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll discuss the results. We can already see the trends moving down a particular direction, and I must say I'm not surprised. All right, wow. So we had quite a few responses, and it seems that this topic is of quite a bit of interest to people. But we have two areas neck and neck, believe it or not. So too many products to select to enable the platform and lack of proper requirements. Now, speak about these two topics. Interestingly, we do cover these topics in a lot of detail later. Let's talk about too many products to select. And that's absolutely true, and that's what we covered in a couple of slides before it. It's not about selecting the CMS. It's about selecting the appropriate platform. Now, quite often organizations start to go down the path of collecting requirements, but they don't do appropriate due diligence. So they start looking at products before they truly know what they need. And what ends up happening is that when you start to look at products, and there's so many out there and there's so many variations and so on, with not having proper requirements documented, you end up becoming, just getting excited about looking at products, and then it becomes difficult to understand which type of product you truly need, or which other products sort of don't fit your needs. So getting requirements documented, truly understanding your needs is critical. And certainly, lack of capturing proper requirements is a bit of an issue. And we see a few reasons why this occurs. One is we hear organizations it's a question of what they don't know. There's a lot that's changing. There's new areas coming up, new types of products coming up, and it's hard to keep track. So when they collect requirements, they're not sure if the requirements are appropriate. Secondly, an initiative such as this is not limited to just IT. There are various parts of an organization that needs to be engaged, including marketing, perhaps sales, and if they're not engaged, then the requirements are not properly articulated. So these two areas they resonate with me because we hear this all the time in terms of the areas of issues that customers face. And we'll certainly talk about them in more detail a little later. Over to Rolf Krause.
Thank you, Rahul. I think one of the first things we need to do is properly define what we mean by digital platform. And digital platform really is a lot more than those individual technical platforms that we refer to in the ecosystem. The digital platform that we are referring to is a vehicle that enables the marketing team and the organization at large to be able to reach various goals. And what we're finding is the big goal acquisition, retention of customers, and improving the overall engagement with the customer throughout the buying cycle. And to do that within a cohesive and unified set of tools that allow people to do this not only effectively, but to do it easily and without a lot of overhead and grief. So let's take a few moments, and before we move into the understanding of the process of selecting a digital platform, let's understand the platforms that we would be selecting, the various categories of platforms that we would be looking at typically when we engage with the customer. And of course, as Rahul had mentioned, one of the first that comes to mind is web content management. There's a lot of change recently in web content management in the fact that many of the systems have reached a certain point of maturity, and the vendors themselves are looking for new opportunities to solve. And we're finding many of these platforms are now reaching into areas of marketing automation, digital asset management, social media, communities, areas that typically have been solved by standalone best-of-class products. With that in mind, there are various considerations that we need to look at, particularly when we're weighing content management systems up against a variety of other platform categories, and just to understand what the core platform in CMS provides versus what additional capabilities it has that might reach into some of these other categories. Are those capabilities going to be sufficient for us, or do we need to look at a best-of-breed product to help us out in those areas? So there's a lot of considerations here in terms of identifying not only your CMS needs, but possibly extending into other areas. With the increased activity that you folks may have noticed in the market, there's a lot of consolidation between companies, acquisition that's occurring. So it's very interesting times for content management systems, and it makes it a bit more challenging now to do the proper selection. A complement that most of us think of to content management is, of course, site search. And site search as well is going through some changes in the fact that we're no longer thinking about site search as purely a web-specific search or a website-specific search, but rather a tool that might be able to stretch across multiple channels and platforms. We could be doing a search against forums or blogs within your community site. Might be searching even outside of your own domain and looking for results returned from Facebook pages that are specific to your fan site on Facebook. So there may be a lot of ways a search engine now will be used that's very different than what we had experienced a couple years ago. With that, there's a lot of things that we used to see as very expensive, things like faceted navigation, which are great for highly structured content. And now we're beginning to see the technologies trickle down from semantic search or natural language search come down into more of the mid-range of some of the search engines. So there's a lot of great things happening here. And search, again, if that experience isn't good, it's one of the key things that people will use as an excuse to turn away from your site and look at a competitor's site. So it's definitely something we want to pay attention to. Another complement that most of us have talked about in the past when we think about content management, we talk about our website, of course, is analytics. And analytics, very much like search, is also going through quite a few changes in the fact that, as we stated before, there may be a variety of platforms within the digital platform ecosystem. And analytics is really about measuring and understanding not only how well we're doing, but some of the new things that are occurring in analytics is taking information that we're gathering, the behavioral information, the visitor journey on the website, whether or not someone clicked on link A or link B in the email that we just sent out, and taking that, consolidating that into a single view of the customer and leveraging that to drive things like personalization. Personalization that may occur within marketing automation system, or may occur within your website through the CMS. So again, analytics, much like some of the other platforms, has its tentacles in a variety of different platforms to get a consolidated view of what's going on. And with that, again, much like CMS in other areas, CMSs in many cases now also include some form of analytics. So again, we need to weigh our need for a dedicated analytics solution versus what may come with our CMS platform. In addition to some of these common platforms that we're used to, these categories of platforms that we're used to, there's a few purpose-driven solutions that we might look at. One, of course, is customer relationship management, CRM, is now becoming a very common point of integration with the rest of the system, particularly now as people are looking toward marketing automation as a big part of how they engage with the customer, and of course dealing with the email channel. Digital asset management, depending on what industry you're in, may be very important. If you deal a lot with products, perhaps you're in the retail space, that might be highly important to you to make sure the images and other information for those products is stored with easy access. And then, of course, e-commerce. And e-commerce can go hand in hand with some of these other systems. And e-commerce systems themselves may include things like email automation and CRM and a variety of other things that, again, we need to weigh against some of the standalone solutions. As we go into some of the what we call kind of hot platforms that are currently out, marketing automation being one, it's finally coming into its own over the last year or so. There's a variety of vendors to choose from now, and we're going to hopefully see some maturation in that market, and then with that, obviously the need for differentiation of these vendors and new functionality coming out. Communities, online communities, also something that is becoming more commonplace. People have partner portals, they have recruitment portals, a variety of mechanisms to help enable their business to reach certain goals. And the online community is becoming a fundamental part of allowing them to do that. Something just coming in, it's getting a lot more discussion and people are not sure exactly where it fits. Something different than communities is around the social media, things like HubSpot and Buzzio, where we're actually able to now kind of grow external community engagement, as well as linking it back to our private online communities. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and the dust has to settle in a few of these areas, but we're seeing some emerging opportunities for marketing organizations to take advantage of these. So with that said, you know, what we find is that if you're a marketer, or even if you're a company at large looking to solve some problems, whether that be how to grow the lead flow, how to achieve conversion of leads in a shorter period of time, maybe it's retention of customers over a longer period of time, customer service, whatever that may be, the digital platform is about being able to engage with people across multiple channels in a unified manner. And because there may be so many different platforms, the process of selecting it can be difficult. So what makes it difficult? Well, first of all, marketers like yourselves are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and your expectations for these platforms are increasing very rapidly. You do a lot of reading. You read about best practices. You understand what's possible. And the world is your oyster if you only have the right tools in place. And so we're finding that marketers do drive a lot of what we're finding out there. We realize CMS doesn't do it all, so we're going to have to look at additional platforms. With that, we've got commoditization in the market. We see proliferation of other platforms, the overlap that we discussed. There's a lot of unproven vendors and emerging technologies. And with all of that said, you know, things really are moving very quickly. Every year, we can see the trends change. This is the year of marketing automation. This is the year of social media. This is the year of mobile. So we see a lot of things change and people adopting things very quickly. So with that said, you know, marketers are the primary driver for a lot of this change. They're the ones that often innovate around some of the goals that they have and are driving new types of technologies. And with that, we're finding that, you know, thinking about your CMS, where we started from, many marketers originally were looking at the CMS and adding to it as the fundamental platform in which they can bolt on additional functionality. They often look at vendors that have claimed to have a full suite of functionality, and perhaps they do, but we also need to take into consideration that those suites built around a CMS may not be or may not have the depth and control that we're looking for. In addition, as we mentioned before, a lot of commoditization. There's a lot to choose from, and there's a lot of overlap. All of this contributing to the complexity involved in making a digital platform decision. So let's start talking more about how we get to the point where we select the product, select the vendors, the platform categories that we want to identify, and then what's the road to success? What are the steps that we've taken and we've found successful in many engagements that we've had to help organizations find platforms that align or are best fit for their needs? So some key things or principles that we always communicate to our customers. One is educate yourself. Don't rely on us to educate you. Go ahead and spend some time on your own. There are plenty of great resources out there. Look at needs, not features. It's very easy to be caught up in the features and the demos, but it's really about what you need and how the platform supports those needs. I always say every car has 4 wheels, steering wheel, doors, engine, but it's really until you take the car out for a test drive, look under the hood, read the consumer's reports, only then will you get a better understanding if that car is going to work for you. Look at solutions holistically opposed to products. See how things fit together, and we'll talk about that some more in a moment. Set the team up for success, and that's very important. Identify the key stakeholders. Get people involved. Follow a process. There are a lot of processes that work. We have one that we use internally, but other organizations have as well. But it's a matter of getting the check boxes that you know they're part of the due diligence process. And then define a roadmap. How are you going to take this process from beginning to end, and what's going to happen afterwards? And then finally, vendor stability. We see a lot of vendors being purchased, some vendors going out of business. So it's always good to have a clear understanding of what the roadmap of the vendor is. So in terms of educating yourself, there's obviously a lot of solutions out there. There are people you can talk to. Go to users groups. Go online, do your research. Don't be afraid to speak with the vendors themselves and have them provide you with analyst reports. If they're looking to sell you something, they can provide you with information as well. The other part is really involving the team. A lot of not selection processes fail, but really what happens after selection, the whole once the product is selected, you may find out that not everyone has been bought in. Not everyone had a chance to have their say. This is where a lot of organizations fall into problems. So getting the team set up correctly, get that broad set of stakeholders really is about laying that foundation for success. Focusing on this as a marketing initiative, making sure that there's clear owners and that there's clear sign-off processes, that people have had their voice and have had a chance to sign off or disagree. And then don't be afraid to bring in the consultants. If you don't feel you need them for the entire engagement, use them wisely where you think you might need them. If they've done this before, there's great value in providing third-party perspective and also providing a third party to facilitate the engagement with internal stakeholders. The other thing is follow a process. And I said before, we ourselves follow a process that we've developed over the years and have refined and matured. But there's a lot of processes out there that work. And you may look at a variety, but make sure that they address some of the due diligence areas that we need to look at. Our process really is around 4 steps. Within each step, there's a lot of various tasks that we go through to both capture information and process that information, get people to respond to it and understand it, and then finally use that to filter the various vendors that we've identified. We want to look at things from a holistic perspective, and again, focusing on that stakeholder input. We really believe that is key to success, not only during the selection, but again, once a selection is made, you don't want people standing up and kind of raining on your parade by saying, hey, I was not involved in that decision. So this is a great time to get everyone involved, get everyone on the same page, and provide proper education. So our selection process, as we just said, really boils down to kind of discovery, analysis, an investigation phase, and finally a selection phase. You know, in the discovery phase, what we find is that this is where we actually prepare for the rest of the phases. We identify the various stakeholders. We work with the lines of business within the organization. We begin to, define the vision for the project, identify clear objectives through project charters, talk about internal use cases or scenarios, how people are going to be using the system, how they want the visitors and your customers to engage with the system. Define the stories around that. Very important tool to define stories because it helps drive things like demos and proof of concepts much better than just pure feature lists, which tend to not focus on how it's done, but kind of tell you, oh, they've got a door, they've got a wheel. So does everyone else. So looking at the stories and the personas is an important part of this. The analysis phase, we take a lot of what we've now put together in the discovery phase, and we start looking at what we've collected, common requirements, see if we've got duplicates. We have some internal negotiation with stakeholders on the meaning of some of these requirements. We begin to prioritize things and refine the stories and use cases that we've developed. And finally, we're able to develop the requirements document, the persona document. And these are tools that we will then use to develop other things like the RFI and the demo scripts, and perhaps a proof of concept document that we will ask vendors to participate in. So in the investigation phase, we now take all these refinements that we have around the requirements and the use cases, and we begin to think about, okay, what's the universe of vendors out there in the various platform categories, CMS, marketing automation, search, maybe it's e-com, that would address, in general, the problems that we have written down, the requirements that we have. Then we begin to identify what's called must-meet requirements. These are things that people within the organization, stakeholders say, hey, I can't live without that. If the product doesn't support that, we're not going to look at it. So by defining that, we quickly narrow down the list from maybe 10 or 15 vendors in a certain category, perhaps down to 5, 6, or 7 vendors in a category. Then we start looking at demonstration criteria, what we might want to see in a demo, proof of concept if we're interested in that. And then all of this begins to come together eventually to also define our RFI, which we send out, and allows us to have another filter to call out vendors that don't meet our requirements. So we engage with the vendors, we let them know what's coming, we send out the RFIs, we get the response, we discuss these internally, and we begin to analyze the information that we've received. We begin to quickly narrow down the platform vendors, perhaps from 5 down to 2, maybe down to 1 if it's really obvious. And then we begin to use the 1 or 2 that we have left and invite them to come in and do demonstrations. And this is where what we've put into play theoretically actually makes its way to practice, because typically in a demonstration we give vendors a 2+ hour window of time. We'll ask them specifically to focus on perhaps some of our POC requirements, proof of concept requirements that we've laid out, and if they've built a proof of concept, some of the demo points that we want to cover, and then they have a chance to have a free-form demo, show what's hot with their product. Here's an example of a lot of what we talked about earlier in terms of different processes, kind of what we call the selection funnel, which we go through some gates, if you will, in each one of the stages that begins to narrow the number of vendors that we begin to talk to. Sometimes we're not just left with one vendor. We may be left with two, and at that point, if they're very close, maybe it's a point of negotiation around price that helps us decide what vendor we want to go with. So this is a common process, having the must-have gate, requirements gate, and then demonstration gate to drive us to the vendor selection. With this process that I've just walked you through, we actually had the opportunity to use it with a variety of customers. And an example of a customer that had the need for a larger digital platform is an international manufacturer of consumer electronics and goods. It's a common brand you'd find in many of the big box stores. These folks were working with a decade-old platform. Their website was running on it, their e-commerce site was running on it, their partner portal was running on it. It had a variety of components, a lot of custom-built code you can only imagine from 10 years ago. And it was limiting their ability to grow as a customer. It was limiting their ability to engage with their customer base and their partner channel. So they're looking for a change here. And with that, they were looking for both web content management, search, e-commerce, and then we discovered the need for what was called product information management later in the process. A little background, it was about a 12-week engagement, about 30 stakeholders we engaged with throughout the organization, 6 different departments, and across 5 different countries. So it was an international group of stakeholders. With that, we spent a lot of time capturing requirements, what we would call elicitation sessions to elicit information from people. We started things off with best practices session, getting everyone level set, educating people as to the process, and then also a team elicitation session where everyone can come to the table and give us some of their hot button requirements. And then we started digging into the groups and the individual groups and their concerns, and finally individual stakeholders, some of the key management. And then spent special attention to some of the overseas teams. We did not want to leave them out. They had some very important input. Plus, we wanted them tightly involved in the overall engagement to make sure they felt involved. With that, what we found is that that information was used to drive the various decision points. Again, the must-have requirements, the RFI responses, and eventually the vendor demonstration were all key parts of this process that we use. During this journey, we identified a variety of different platforms that could fit the bill, if you will. And one of the approaches that we take when we do kind of a broad digital platform selection is this notion of using buckets of options. And what that means is that typically there isn't one set of platforms that is the ideal set. There's typically a set of options, all of which will work, but they have their pros and cons as a set rather than individual platforms. So as we look at this, we had content management as a need, e-commerce, search, merchandising, which is a subset of e-commerce, product information management, which is a subset of e-commerce, and then analytics. And here you can see that we're looking at leveraging some of the analytics that were built into a CMS platform, which is Sitecore. We were looking at a variety of e-commerce platforms, including SaaS-based and on-premise-based with Digital River, and premise-based with Microsoft Commerce servers, as well as hybrids. And then search, as well as merchandising, either through OMS or through the search engine in some cases. So you can see that there may be a variety of different platforms that support specific requirements and use cases. It's not always cut and dry. It's not always clear on the outset of going through a process like this. Eventually, the team, including us, as well as the customer, sat down. We went through the pros and cons, and we were able to narrow it down to a specific solution, which involved option number 3. You know, along the way, one of the things, again, as a learning experience, is the notion that as you go through this broad requirements analysis within your organization, what you might find is that there's some serendipitous situations, things that you didn't expect to come up. And one was, in this case, is that the customer nor us initially realized that there was a need for a product information management system. But then as we began to speak with various stakeholders, particularly the product managers and the marketers, it became very apparent that there was a hole that would not be solved, or filled, I should say, by content management, by e-commerce, or by search or analytics. And that led us to the notion that we needed to take a look at product information management systems. Now, this might be a common journey as you go through larger digital platform analysis requirements, and you say, you know, we didn't realize we needed marketing automation, but you know, everyone's talking about able to do this, these dialogues, electronic dialogue with the customer, nurturing campaigns, and things like that. I guess we may need to look at that. So you never know when you might see a need where you weren't expecting it. So in the end, this was a successful selection. We were able to identify 3 products, and the customer and us were very happy with the process. Stakeholders were happy because they were involved. So it's a good example of following through a set process, getting people involved along the way early on, educating them, making sure you had a broad set of stakeholders getting buy-in along the way, so that when we got to the end, there were no surprises. Everyone was on board, and people felt very comfortable with the decision that was made. So, great example of how a process can work, even in a complex situation, even when you have a lot of stakeholders involved with very strong ideas. So, great. Thank you very much for your time. We're going to take some time now with the 20 minutes that we have left, and ask you to provide us with some of the questions that you might have around the process, around the way we might do it, around perhaps some of the pitfalls, and we'd love to hear from you, and feel free to reach out. You should see the ability for you to ask questions through the mechanism on the GoToWebinar, and then we'll be glad to answer those verbally. All right. I think someone raised their hand. Don't be afraid to raise your hand again.
I have a question. It says, why was...
Yep.
The question is, why was Joomla not considered as a CMS?
Go ahead and repeat the question again.
Yeah, the question was, why was Joomla not considered as a CMS?
Yeah, great question. So in this case, the customer had some very specific requirements. And remember, we talked about the must-have requirements. Now, we do work with Joomla. We do work with Drupal and a variety of other platforms. And what you'll find in the industry in general, you'll find technologies that are based either on an open source PHP stack, so a LAMP stack. You'll find platforms that are based on Java, and you find platforms that are based on the Microsoft.NET stack. So there's three primary stacks that you will find these products in general based. In this specific requirement, the customer had some needs around .NET because they had already had an entire team spun up to do .NET development and .NET support, and their entire internal infrastructure was really based around .NET. So actually one of the must-have requirements early on was around a CMS that would support the .NET stack. So that immediately eliminated Java-based solutions like Day or FatWire, as well as PHP solutions like a Drupal or other open source solutions. I think Bob Coleman had a question. Okay, that was Bob's question. I hope I was able to answer that for you.
We have another question. It says, does your systems integrate with Great Plains?
Yes, so that's another great question. So let's talk about integration in general, and then let's talk about Great Plains. I think there are really two questions that we could break out of that. So one of the things that perhaps we didn't touch on in here, that you could go back to that image of the ecosystem where you had the CMS in the center, and then you had the various bubbles of different other platforms that are kind of a hub and spoke diagram, if you will, around the ecosystem. You know, Great Plains as a general purpose accounting platform could also plug in as one of those purpose-specific platforms, much like e-commerce, much like some of the other purpose-specific platforms. And so the answer is, if, for instance, you are looking to do a digital platform selection, and Great Plains is an existing platform within your ecosystem, you know it's not going to change, then you would look to understand what are the integration requirements for Great Plains and roll that into the overall requirement for your platform selection. So in terms of whether our solution integrates with Great Plains, we actually work with a variety of different platforms, not just one. And if we were working with you, that would be one of the requirements that we would look at. And when we work with the vendors and interrogate them, per se, we would ask them how we would do that integration, what technical facilities are there that allow us to move information between Great Plains and perhaps the CMS or perhaps the e-commerce system. Are there any other questions?
We had a hand raised from the audience. Sarah, you may ask a question now, please. Okay, so till the time we get the question from Sarah, we can take another question, which is about the pricing. What is the general pricing for the selection process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as with anything, as if you're buying a house or a car, it really depends on how big that's going to be. Same thing with something like a selection process. With the selection process, we look at several things. One, it's going to be dependent on how many platforms might be involved, how many stakeholders might be involved. We find that as we work in larger and larger organizations, the number of stakeholders that we need to engage with and also the time it takes to engage with stakeholders increases. So all of that has a bearing on the cost of the engagement. But typically engagements can last anywhere from a few weeks if we're just working with a small team, focusing on a few on a single platform, to multiple weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, if we're focusing on a large organization, multiple platforms. So it could be anywhere from, you know, $10,000 on up to well over $100,000, depending on the level of work that's required.
Next question is, how long does the selection process take?
Well, again, it goes back to the question around pricing, and that's a dependency around, again, those two key elements. The complexity of the organizational structure and the number of stakeholders or groups of stakeholders that we would need to engage with. And then, of course, the platforms themselves, how many. Another thing to look at is we're doing work with a customer now where they're also comparing internal incumbent platforms, in other words, platforms that they already have in place, with potential up against new platforms to see if they want to replace the internal platforms with new platforms or they want to keep them. So if we go through that option grid as we had before, we're actually going to spend time and plug in some of their old platforms and see if it makes sense to keep those. So all of these type of things also contribute to the overall complexity of the selection process and can drive the time as well. Any other questions, Kamia?
Yes, we have a question. It says, what is the best way to approach the vendor demo?
That's a great question. The vendor demo, I may have touched on it shortly, but I can get into a bit more detail. Definitely vendor demos need to have a directed component to them, and then a component that enables the vendor to show off what they believe is differentiating about their platform. So in this case, a directed demo is one in which you will have taken requirements, you will have taken use scenarios or user stories, resolve them into a script that you want them to follow in the demo. So as I may have mentioned, demos typically are anywhere from 2 to 3 hours in length. And in that time, anywhere from an hour to maybe 2 hours can be dedicated to the directed demo, where the vendor is focused on making sure that they go through the specific scenarios that you've outlined for them. And that as the stakeholders are sitting there, they have the opportunity to not only see that, but also ask questions. Why did you do it this way? Can I do it that way? So it's ideally set up in a very interactive manner based on things that the stakeholders are already familiar with from a day-to-day basis, the work they do. The second part of the demo, which can be shorter, allows the vendor to show how they differentiate themselves. Maybe it's a CMS that says, we've got the world's greatest marketing engine that's bundled with our CMS. Let us show you how great this is and how this can keep you from having to buy marketing automation. It may or may not, but it's good to see. So let them do their dog and pony show and let them have that opportunity, because in many cases you might find things that you would not have known about had you not asked them to show their latest and greatest. Any other questions?
Yes, I have. There's one last question that says, how should we build our initial vendor list?
That's a great question. So the initial vendor list can actually be pulled together in a lot of different ways. Of course, for ourselves, being consultants, doing this regularly, we also have relationships with a variety of vendors. We talk to them. We want to understand their products. We do that on a regular basis. So that's one of the values that a consultancy can provide in this equation, because we have people working with those products and just evaluating them ourselves. The second thing is, if you're looking to put a vendor list together yourself, there's a variety of resources out there around CMS, everything from CMS Wire to being able to find those downloadable Gartner as well as Forrester reports. And then on the open source community, which isn't typically followed as closely by those analysts, there's a lot of great resources there, everything from blogs where people have already said, hey, ask the question, what are the top X number of platforms you would look at? Let other people tell you what they think and start reading about it and engaging with those people. So it's a great opportunity. Around some of the other platforms outside of CMS, finally, there are some emerging sites. There are some analysts that focus on things, particularly on the social platforms that aren't as common and that may not initially be followed by some of the bigger analysts. So there are those sites available that you would just, again, Google and find and begin to dig into. Any other questions, Kamia?
No, we've covered all the questions.
Great.
So at this point, we'll go ahead and close the webinar. Thank you so much for attending. Again, feel free to reach out to us should you have any questions. We'd be more than happy to answer those, and I hope you all have a wonderful day wherever you're calling in from. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.